Welcome to this session today on managing your medical practice. I'm Dr. Larry Earle, Urgent Care Mentor. Today we're discussing we're so busy. Why aren't we making any money? So during a recent medical practice management consultation, I listened to an owner of a hybrid family medicine urgent care practice lamenting, "We've been open for about 4 years. After about the first 2 years, we became profitable. This past year, we're busier than ever, but barely breaking even." So I asked him, "Well, how many patients are you seeing?" He said about 100 a day. Now, most of the time I hear this from any practice operator, it's usually due to one or more of either overstaffing, staff productivity issues, or bad contracts and reimbursements. So profitability is obviously the difference between income and expenses. In a medical practice, or any service business for that matter, the bulk of the expenses are going to be your staff. So let's talk about overstaffing first. In a mostly walk-in type practice, it's difficult to know exactly when you're going to need that second, third, fourth provider, right? You certainly need to have some way of looking at the hourly patient flow over time and understand your trends. Now, on the one hand, you want to provide good service and little to no waiting time, but you need to balance that with providers and staff that don't have long periods of downtime when the flow isn't there. And it's not practical to bring someone in for a 2 or 3 hour shift for just those busy times. So here's a few staffing strategies we can look at. Here's the situation. You basically have one provider that you need most of the time in a 12-hour day, and you're used to having 12-hour shifts. But you get a surge of patients in the morning, and then it gets backed up by 10 or 11. So solution one would be having overlapping shifts. The provider one shift is 8 until about 1 or 2. Sometimes even until noon. It depends on when it typically slows down for you. Then have the second provider come in on a 10 to 8 shift. So this gives you the overlap for the busier times, and the providers can generally alternate the short and long days according to the amount of hours they desire or that you're contracted for. Solution 2 would be using a queuing application. So if the flow tends to slow down too much for 2 providers on duty in the early afternoon, or you have trouble getting those shifts filled, then an alternative would be using a queuing app. Now this is available on your website and on mobile for patients to put themselves online. This gives them an estimated time to be seen so they don't have to actually come in right away. Walk-in patients can also sign into the queuing system and have the option to go do some other errands if their estimated visit time is an hour or more from now. So the patient's perception when using these apps is that they're not actually waiting. They're seen at their estimated designated time and can be alerted if things are running a bit longer than expected. So now instead of 8 patients coming in during that 9 to 10 hour, 4 of them can be effectively moved to later in the morning or early afternoon when it's a little bit slower. Solution 3 would be taking appointments. Well, wait a minute, we're a walk-in practice, aren't we? Well, maybe. We're in the convenience business, right? And that used to mean no appointment, walk-in basis, but then it gets too busy and there's a long wait, so that's not so convenient anymore. People want to know, when are they going to see the doctor? So when should you use appointments? Well, if you're doing primary care, schedule those exams or follow-up visits during the slower times, or when you can also schedule a provider during those times. Same for work comp follow-ups and work-related or other exams that can be scheduled. If one provider is seeing both appointments and walk-ins, keep the appointments to just 1 or 2 per hour, or whatever makes sense for your average flow, as you'll track in a chart like this. Overall, your docs, nurse practitioners, and PAs should be seeing somewhere in the range of 3 to 4 patient visits per hour. Now, this is for a typical urgent care or occupational medicine practice. Primary care might be a little bit on the lower end of that. Now, I've known some colleagues who have and still do see 6+ visits per hour. And I've worked with practices where some of the providers see less than 2 patients per hour. Now, that's not really typically sustainable, but there's quite a range. And there's a lot of reasons for variation here. Acuity or severity level is very different across practices. EMRs and other systems may be bogging things down. Hybrid practices, seeing primary care and urgent care patients, would be a different rate of flow. And some providers are just slow. So in a given practice, we first want to know, well, what's the overall productivity? And then we'll look at each provider. We'll observe what the variances are and determine why and what to do about it. Several KPIs, key performance indicators, we want to look at to determine productivity and understand the variations. Visits per hour by payer contract. Revenue per hour, usually just charges minus allowances, is best to get an estimated net revenue. So this is not where we're assessing days in AR. That's a different exercise. So we can just use this as a proxy for net revenue. Revenue per visit by payer contract, the E&M distribution, patient mix, charges, payrolls per hour and per hour by contract, fixed and variable expenses per hour and per hour by contract. Now, these last two items are often overlooked, and the significance of these not really recognized. It's not always easy to get at these numbers, and sometimes it takes some fairly detailed spreadsheet work to get it. But in a medical practice where the bulk of your expense is payroll, you need to know which patient visits are consuming what amount of resources. Payroll, share of fixed and variable expenses, and then determine if the average reimbursement per hour exceeds those resource expenses. So we break down each visit from each payer or contract into the payroll, fixed, and variable costs consumed by that type of visit. Compare that to the net revenue per visit, and then we figured out which contracts are profitable. A further step would be to do this for each provider. Sometimes we find one provider is more efficient at caring for one type of patient versus another. So part of our process may be then that we'll shift those patients when possible, usually more relative to primary care, but may also be procedures or certain work-related visits to the more efficient provider. You might also find that a provider is just slow or inefficient. If possible, you might only schedule that provider for slow times or dole out available hours or shifts to the more efficient providers preferentially. If presenting your productivity findings to the non-productive provider doesn't result in improvements, you'll ultimately decide on whether you can keep them in the practice. Other times we will determine that the contract is just not profitable overall. So if we cannot alter our cost structure to accommodate these findings, then we need to go back to the payer and see about a rate increase, laying out our reasons why it's not a profitable relationship. Failing that, drop the contract. What? Wait, drop a contract. Well, don't we want to see as many patients as we can? Well, no. If you're in a situation where you're working your patooties off, there's long wait times, you're stressing about making the payroll because cash flow is tight, you need to make the call about how to improve your business. You can see less patients and make more money. Now, this of course often comes with cutting staff, your biggest expense. You have to plug in your new patient flow assumptions into your spreadsheet, take out the payroll and variable costs associated with those visits, keep the fixed costs, then see what effect there is on the net profit. With about 50% of patients now having high deductible plans, it may be that they're out of pocket at any rate. So even given a cash discount or implementing a transparent, tiered pricing system displayed prominently in your lobby for cash pay patients is often better than getting a small copay now and then waiting a month or more to get the rest of your unprofitable contract rate. Your bottom line isn't about getting busier and busier. It's about looking at a detailed analysis of your practice, and that will reveal the source of your pain and make the fix more obvious. Do you want to learn about how this would look in your practice? A small investment in this type of an analysis can pay off in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars every year for many years to come. So we can take on a few clients each month to go through this process to give you a lot more clarity in what's going on in your practice, less anxiety, more profits. So if this is something that you're interested in, we would invite you to apply for a free strategy analysis. We'll want to make sure that the type of problem that you're having in your practice is something that we can help you with. We don't want to waste your time or our time. So click the button down below here or click the link and schedule a time, fill out the form. We'll make sure that we're compatible and we'll get a free strategy session scheduled. Thanks. See you there.